All right, Qualcast Nation, we have a very special guest today. Somebody that I've only really got to know over the last little while here, and her and her family have become, in my opinion, my new heroes in the way they've really addressed adversity and tragedy. And I'm hoping this conversation can inspire many and to that are in similar situations, but also the level of advocacy that they're doing and that the Bell family is doing, and hopefully we can find a way to support them. But Tammy, thanks for joining us on
Hello.
the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think maybe the easiest place to begin is talking about Griffin's story, like how it all began way back then, and giving a sense for people what you've unfortunately had to overcome.
I mean, our story began before he was even born. So when I was 23 and a half weeks pregnant, actually my water broke. Just one random morning, 5 a.m., my water broke. So we headed to the Civic. Had he have been born then, they weren't able to care for him. So we were transferred over to the general hospital. And you go in scared because you're pregnant and you know it's way too early to have a baby. And, from there was tests and ultrasounds and so on and so forth, and sort of, instantly start being read the statistics from the NICU if he had been born this early. Actually at that time, we didn't even know if it was a he. And then we were given the statistic, well, do you want to know if it's a boy or girl? Because statistically, girls have a better chance of survival if they're born this early, and just sort of all these things. And it just becomes this big whirlwind. So basically he was in there. My water had fully broke. I think he had like a little pocket of fluid that was, like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, whatever he needed to kind of just keep his lungs going. And I sat on bed rest for 4.5 weeks with him in there at the hospital. Somehow he hung in, and then right at about 29 weeks, he was born via emergency C-section. I guess he decided that's when he wanted to come. So we, our journey in the medical world, I guess, with children began really then. So we spent a week at the neonatal intensive care unit at the general, and then he was doing really well, and we got transferred to the Civic, where he spent another 8 weeks. And then we got to bring him home for about a week. And then we went back in because we thought that he was ill. And at that point, I don't even think he was actually term. And so we went back in, we took him into CHEO, into the emerge under the advice of our physician. And it turned out that he had a urinary tract infection. So because he was such a tiny little baby at the time, a PICC line was inserted, and we spent 2 weeks in the hospital so that he could get antibiotics. We came home for a couple days, and then we went back in because he got another UTI, which is when they sort of started investigating more, maybe what could be going on inside his body. And so ultimately it was determined that he had urinary reflux and, correct me if I'm wrong, but biped kidneys. Is that what it's right? Yeah. And so, then we landed in the hands of nephrology and urology and sort of all these clinics at CHEO. And because he was born so premature, he also had some calcium in his kidneys that they wanted to make sure didn't turn into stones. So, through all of our tests when he's only a month old, we find out all these things. So then we land in the hands of these clinics at CHEO. And we go through the first year, and we're having routine ultrasounds every 3 months, checking up on his kidneys, checking up on the urinary reflux. He starts on like an antibiotic to make sure that he doesn't get any more UTIs. And then fast forward, so that was September, fast forward to the following October. So he's just about 16 months at that time, and we have just our routine ultrasound for his kidneys. And they discovered a mass that was growing on his adrenal gland. From there, they assumed that it was a form of childhood cancer called neuroblastoma, which, there was no indication he could have been living with. Everything else was great. He was thriving. He was, healthy otherwise. And actually, when we had our scans in July, they weren't there either. So this was, our 3-month follow-up. So he had a 6 centimeter mass growing on his adrenal gland, just above his right kidney. And, they rushed us into the ER, fast tracked all of our tests, blood work, more scans, MRIs, x-rays. And we found out 2 days later that he actually was, did have neuroblastoma. And, we went from there. So, we had a rocky start when he was born. Then we had a pretty normal year, still a lot of meds and whatnot. And then we were thrown into the oncology world when he was 16 months old. And then we were there, until he was almost 7.
Wow. Oh my
Yep.
goodness. So really, Tammy, there was like the journey started even before
Yeah,
he was born.
exactly.
And so there really has been like that level of angst from the very start. And when you got that diagnosis back when he was 16 months old, like what happened? Like what went through your head? Like how did you manage? How did you deal? Was it because sometimes you get I have a family friend who's also their kid at 8 months got diagnosed, and she was very much go mode, like really in
Yeah.
mama mode, where we're just like,
And that's, you take the day. I think we were just in shock, like I have pictures of that day and I look back and I'm like, even still, this kid did not have cancer at that time. You refuse to believe it. So we kind of spent the first day or two just processing, trying to figure out. We were still admitted to the hospital at that time. And then, our daughter is in JK. So, we're having to manage her while we're trying to be with him. And for about 2 days, we were kind of like life is upside down. And then that second day hits and you're like, okay, well, how are we going to fix this? What are we doing? What do we do next? How do we fix him? How do we get him better? How do we, move forward? And that kind of was the way that it was throughout our whole journey. We would get news of a relapse or, treatment wasn't working the way that they had planned. And you get the wind knocked out of you for that day. And then you get back up the next day and you're like, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Let's move forward because, it's the only way to kind of keep going. So yeah, it's like fight mode starts like this, somebody said to me once, like this shell of armor comes over your body and you're like, into battle. And that's exactly how it is, kind of perspectives change with things that matter and things that don't. And then, you just move forward from there.
and was that is that what kept you going? Like, is that really like having that, I guess, that shell, or like, because I think we all us as parents, we put ourselves in that situation, and I must say, like, I I can't see myself handling it well, like, and
And a lot of people say that to me and I'm like, well, you would, you'd be very surprised by the amount of strength you have when you really don't have any other choice but to be strong. And and again, our daughter was 5, and so she needed us and she needed to move forward in life, and he needed us because he was still thriving. Like, despite this diagnosis, he was still thriving, and so we needed to just kind of keep going. And my husband and I decided very, very early on that we were going to just keep life as normal as we could. I always said, like, he has cancer, but cancer doesn't have us, and we're just going to keep going, as if um, everything's normal. Besides the fact we, had to spend time in the hospital for chemo and treatments and scans, and everything was very not normal. But we tried to keep it that way. And I think, truthfully, that first year, he was diagnosed in October. His hair probably fell out by December. So he was wearing toques all winter long. And then come March, his hair started to grow back. So the toques came off and his hair was there. And so for people who didn't know me, at school or whatever, they probably had no idea that he was going through this or we were going through this because, we kept it very normal, very normal.
Wow. And I was one of those folks that did not know that you guys were dealing with what you were dealing with. And so in this journey, was there much time for reprieve? Like in terms of what happened next? Because it sounds like there were some episodes where there were some potentially cleaner scans
So
what happened next?
So he started treatment in October at 16 months. And then at 22 months, he had major abdominal surgery and they resected the tumor. Scans came back clean. The margins on the tumor were clean. And we were in remission. So he stayed there for 2 years, actually. And then just before we got let go from oncology care and we were put into the short-term care at CHEO, we had our 2-year scans. And there was, when he had surgery, there was always sort of this little kind of spot on his IVC that was still there. And they just chalked it up to being scar tissue from, cut line or whatever. Unfortunately, 2 years later, that tiny little spot grew. And then we were thrown back in. But we had 2 years that were, very normal. But I say they're very normal. I lived on the edge of my seat for those 2 years. Like every 3 months, you're still going for scans. And I kind of felt like at any point, anyone could just kind of like, stiff breeze could blow me off a cliff and we'd be spiraling right back into it. And I don't know if that was like a defense mechanism almost, kind of telling myself that, this is going to come back. We're going to have to do it again. And not allowing myself to believe that he was actually in remission. And I think in the end that kind of saved me when we found out that he had relapsed. But yeah, we had time. And then we went through it again so that was April. We went through it again to the end of the summer. And then we had about another year of normalness, but it was COVID. So we had COVID, then cancer with COVID. And then for the last 2 years, it was a solid, full steam ahead, trying to get rid of this. So we had, not quite that long. We had about 2.5 years where we were removed from the oncology world, but still going through scans and tests. Yeah.
And with your efforts, Tammy, of trying to keep things as normal as possible for Griff, how was he during all of this?
He was amazing. Even the team of doctors at CHEO were amazed by him. He'd come in with the biggest smile on his face, as if it was the best day ever. He was so happy. He was, he wasn't bothered by the needles. He wasn't bothered by the He, for the first 6 months that we were in treatment, he was, given 5 rounds of chemotherapy. There was no neutropenia. There was no vomiting. There was no loss of appetite. There was nothing. He didn't slow down. I felt bad actually when we went into remission that we had just gone through this, and I watched other families go through it, and it was almost easy for us. And that shouldn't have been the case in my mind. When you go through cancer treatment, it shouldn't be easy. It's supposed to be hard. And he just made it easy. He was incredible. And then even, the last 2 years of going through it, he started playing hockey. He was playing soccer during the summer. He was playing t-ball. He, would get 5 days we'd be in for immunotherapy at CHEO from Monday to Friday. He'd come home Friday evening and he'd be at the rink playing hockey on Saturday morning. He just didn't let it slow him down. He just, he kept going. And we, if he needed to rest, then he would rest. We knew when we were coming up to those days where his counts were going to drop and he was probably going to end up, with a fever or whatever, we would rest on those days. But otherwise he was at school, he was with friends, he was Like we just, we kept it very normal.
Mm.
Again, normal. Yeah. Yeah.
And do you attribute his reactions, like him just being Griff, because of that attempt to be normalcy, to keep that level of
I
normalcy?
think so. Like we didn't ever really allow him to believe, even when we would find out that he would, relapse. And most recently when, you know, statistically, if we knew how sick he was, we didn't, that was never translated to him. It was never, um, we never let him know that he was, unwell because he just wanted to keep going. So we let him do that. We'd go to the ski hill, we'd go to the rink, we just kept pushing forward and he just followed along. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow. And so leading up to when he passed, Tammy, maybe you could just walk us through the events there, because from my understanding, it wasn't, and correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't clear like he was going to die on that admission.
No. So, we, we were running out of options here. We'd kind of gone through the standard protocols. And so, last summer we landed in the hands of, sick kids in Toronto, and we were going through trials there. I always say the neuroblastoma guru, but somebody that our oncologist here would often refer to. He was out of Toronto and he just happened to be on a bunch of these studies. And actually, through some genetic testing, we found that Griff had a genetic mutation in his most recent lesion, which allowed us to try for this targeted therapy drug in Toronto. And so, we did a couple months of that. And then that wasn't really working. After a few months, everything kind of got just a little bit worse. So they took us off it. Things got better, then they got a little worse. And then around Christmas, we were there again, starting another trial. And it was there that we sort of had the conversation with the doctors, because there his organs kind of started to get angry. It was when his liver was unhappy, his kidneys were unhappy. And so we had to kind of dial back on some chemotherapy that we were going to give him, because they were worried that his kidneys wouldn't be able to handle it. And so we had the discussions with the doctors in January, just after Christmas, that, they weren't sure what we could do next. How do we see this moving forward? Do we want to risk damaging his organs more, or do we want to just kind of go a route where we sort of just manage the symptoms and try and manage the chemo and manage the cancer and try and stop it from getting worse. And that's sort of where we landed there. He had told us it was very unlikely we were ever going to cure Griff, just because, we'd been through immunotherapy, we'd done radiation, we'd done the chemotherapy, we've kind of done everything that we could. So that was January. And after that, it was sort of a downhill slope. But he was still doing very well. Like physically, he looked sicker. He wasn't able to gain his fat back, and he was thinner, and he was kind of slowing down. And then early at the end of February, sort of we did some scans because we were going to now start this new trial drug, and it sort of came back that there was maybe a spot on his liver that they were worried about. And at this point, he'd kind of become platelet dependent. His liver was angry. His blood numbers were kind of all over the place, and then they'd get really good, and then they'd be really bad. And so at the beginning of March, we kind of got called in by the palliative care team, and they sort of wanted to discuss with us, what we would want end of life to look like, because they wanted to have that sort of paper signed, sealed, and delivered if we should end up there, just because we were kind of, we were pulling at straws at this point. And even during that conversation, my husband and I were like, oh, great, let's have this conversation. But, we laughed and we were like, he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. Look at him. Like, he's going to be great. And then, we went on our wish trip, which was like a whirlwind of planning. And, they really pushed for us to go. And I kind of kept saying like, well, should we wait? Because, right now, like we're finishing out, our oral chemotherapy and we're going to need transfusions when they're like, let's maybe wait. And then we can go for a little bit longer. And they were like, no, you should go. And then we came back and it was March break and it was great. And, movies and this and that. But he was slowing down quite a bit. And the walk to school wasn't able to happen. And if we were going in for appointments, I'd have to carry him. Actually, we ended up buying a stroller because he just didn't have, the energy to walk. And so we went through March break and, still happy, but tired. And then that weekend it was a Sunday evening and he went in for a platelet transfusion because we were going to head off to Toronto for the night. And when he got home, I kind of thought to myself, that's strange. I don't know the last time that he actually like peed. It might have been last night at 6 p.m. and it's now noon. And so I, thought, okay, well, let's try and whatnot. See if you can have a bowel movement, see if you can, go pee or anything, it's kind of strange that you haven't gone. And in the very back of my mind, my sister-in-law in London, her mother passed away from cancer a few years ago now. And, a few months previous to this, she had told me that the day that her mother passed, she knew she was going to pass because she'd stopped going to the washroom. And so in the back of my mind, this is sitting, but I kept saying, I think he has a UTI. We're going full circle back to where we were, 6 years ago. He might have a UTI because he did have some lower abdominal pain. Let's take him in. So, I call Oncology, I give them the symptoms and they agreed with me. Yes, sounds very much like a UTI. Come on in. Let's see what's going on. And when we entered, the ER that day, we were sent right to recess because they knew that he was, sicker than we did, I think. Like we knew, but they could tell. And so we entered and his oxygen, he was like sitting at like 82. But again, still like, I want root beer. I want this. I want, like still very, he was tired. And you could tell he was uncomfortable. Like he had a lot of abdominal pain. And, they kept saying, we think he's sepsis because his neutrophils were very low and they just assumed like he had, an infection in his abdomen and he was sepsis and so on and so forth. And then through scans and, sometime around midnight that night is when we were told like his liver's angry. It's, the size of his abdomen. His one lung had collapsed. It was, all these things that you don't think you're going to hear because he didn't look that sick to, like you just had this misconception of like when you have cancer, like you look very, very sick. And again, to the outside world, he probably did. But I think in my mind, I wasn't allowing myself to see that because I just don't think you want to accept that, right? As a parent. And so we went in there again, told our daughter, we'll be back tonight. And then we didn't come home with them. So.
Yeah. Sorry. Hearing you guys tell the story, obviously, there's just tons of emotions that go through. Just you think of Griff, you think of you guys, and first of all, I'm so sorry you guys have gone through all this.
Thank you. Me too.
From the beginning to now.
Me too. And the one thing though, because now it's almost been 3 months, which seems crazy. This is going to sound so stupid or cliche for somebody to say, but I feel like he gave us such a gift. We were able to live life as if truly the next day might be the last because he, being in that world that's so scary. And we packed so much stuff into those almost 7 years of his life, that a lot of people don't get to in a lifetime. And we, even the days that I spent sitting in the hospital with him, just talking with him, which could have just been awful because you're sitting in a a hospital room, and, he's getting his blood transfusion and whatever, just hanging out on those slow moment days. Like, we spent so much time together that otherwise you wouldn't, because you get caught up in life. It's nobody's fault. You just get caught up in life. There's school, there's work, there's activities, there's all of this and all of that. And, we did those things, but we also had a lot of downtime where we got to just hang out and spend time as a family and together. And, and that's the one thing that I will always take out of it, because as horrible as it is, he's given us so much to live with from now on. So
Yeah.
if there's anything positive to take from it, it's that. Yeah.
Can I ask, Tammy, like you mentioned those moments and the slower moments waiting for transfusions and stuff, and connecting there. Are there specific memories that really stick out when it comes to Griff? Whether it is the simple moments, the vacations, seeing him play sports, is there anything that really comes to mind?
Oh God, all of it. I don't know. He was just so funny. He had just a way of always, when we were at the hospital, I think he, maybe not so close to the end because he was just sick of being there, but I really think was one of the easier, patients to have. And he was so full of life and so full of light. And, he really just wanted to share that with everybody, and, I think just watching him interact with his friends, and I think that's one of the hardest parts, about all of this, is that, I think there's a lot of people that really miss him outside of us, um, kids at school and my daughter's friends. And, the fact that he was able to give that to people in his 7 short years, I think is one of the biggest takeaways from it all. It's one of the best memories, is watching him interact with kids and watching him, play and have friends and have fun and interact with people. I think he kind of left this little mark on anybody that he met. And so, I hope people can carry that forever with them. But I think that's, I just enjoyed watching him, and he just, like, there's this spot at the table that still has all of his things sitting there, and he would just sit there and he'd color and he'd make up these stories, and he just, like, he was a kid, despite, and maybe a wiser kid than most, because he did have to navigate like a sort of an adult world. And, and he just got it, and he was funny.
Yeah. No, we definitely got that impression that Griff left a mark wherever he was, and that having that jovial approach, I think it's hard not to notice, and so I think that's very accurate in terms of your impression, Tammy. The other, like, I feel like there's a lot of lessons that we could learn from what you experienced, Tammy, and one of the questions that I've been keen to get your perspective on is anyone that's gone through the system, that, like, 7 years in the system, or the healthcare system, like the way your family has had to see some positives and some negatives, and I guess, what are some of the things that you could tell healthcare providers that matter? And I'll give you a context for as an example. Like, I was telling you earlier, one of my good friends, her kid had neuroblastoma, and one of the things I'll never forget when we were having our conversation was when she was so keen on hearing from the doctors like on a daily basis, and one day they didn't really stop by, and the impact that that had on her well-being and her mental state, even though everything was fine and so forth, and it left me as a doc thinking, I don't want my patients or family members to go through that. Like if they have that, if I'm contributing to their anxiety in an already stressed time, like fuck that. Like I don't want to be that guy. So is there anything that stuck out in your mind in terms of the healthcare providers?
So, I mean, we had similar situations, and I completely understand, that our oncologist can't be there all the time. She's got to be up on the floor, or she's, away for work, or she needs vacation, or, there's many times where she couldn't be there. But we'd gone through it so long with her that if, I specifically remember one time where she wasn't there, and I think she was actually at home. And Evan said to the nurse, can we see our oncologist? And she was like, well, like she's not available right now, or she's at home or whatever. And Evan was like, no, we need to see our oncologist now. And she came in from home to see us. Because, I think she knew us pretty well by that point, that if we were, demanding to see her, that there was something wrong. And at that time, there was something very wrong. The cancer had moved to his orbital bone. And at this point, his eyeball's now protruding from his head, and to anyone else who might just see us that day, well, maybe that's a baseline. They don't know, what it was before. So that's one of the things that I will also agree with was really hard, was when, we would not get to see her on days where we really needed to have a conversation with her, because she really knew Griffin, really knew what was going on. And there was an instance where a couple times I brought up things, and it was just sort of dismissed as, well, it could be this, it could be that, or whatever. And then, she would see him and she was like, no, this is something that we need to look into. Let's do it. And then that's ultimately how we ended up finding out that we had relapsed, in the orbital bone. But it wasn't until we saw her where it was like, oh no, this is not normal. This is not him. So we should do something about it. And I mean, it's nobody's fault. Everyone's just trying to medically do what they think is right. But, we felt very comforted by her. And so seeing her, and hearing what she had to say really, really was comforting for us. And she would often call us at home with scan results and stuff, and she could give us the worst news, but then talking to her, we just kind of felt better, like we were going to, get through this and do something about it. So I'll definitely agree with that statement. So, whether it's planning, those visits when the doctors are actually there that you need to see, I'm not sure. Again, I know logistically that can't always work. But there was a while that we went without seeing her, and we value her opinion, even, on that last evening, she was away for work, and, the doctors did know that we valued her opinion, and we really always did want to hear what she had to say. And so they offered to call her for us, which at that point, it really wouldn't have made a difference because it was, that far gone. But that's the one thing that I will say, was difficult, was navigating that. And we often found it, I ask a lot of questions because I wanted to understand the world. I wanted to understand, I went to the appointments because Evan knew that I was going to have 20 questions I needed to ask that day, because I just needed to piece it all together and make sense of it in my mind. And again, I know that this needs to happen, but I found it difficult sometimes when we were dealing with, a student who couldn't necessarily answer my questions. And then, our appointment would end and they would still kind of really not get answered in the sense that I would want them to be. So that was a little hard to navigate. I often found that I was a little frustrated after those appointments because, I wasn't given the responses that I felt like I needed to sort of make sense of what we were being told. But again, I know that, those are things that need to happen because we need to have doctors, we need to have, we need to have these students. But that was one thing that I found a little difficult because sometimes they wouldn't be like accompanied by, uh, a, an oncologist or a physician or whatever. And so it was, And I think that was truthfully because it was just too busy. Like, that medical day unit in GEO, sadly, is a very busy place. There are many kids in and out of there. And so there wasn't always time, and then, enter all the other things that happened in the last few years in the world, and so that was hard. And we really felt that. And then I have a love-hate relationship with my chart. I I hate it. And thankfully our oncologist knew that. So scan results and test results were never uploaded to that until we got to see them. However, that's my personal opinion. I know many other families, leukemia families and so on and so forth, who now, can read the results themselves and make sense of it. Whereas for me, when I'm getting an MRI, I don't know the wording. I don't know so I don't want that coming across my email on a Friday afternoon when I can't talk to anybody, So that was my personal opinion. And so sometimes maybe it'd be nice to opt out of that. Maybe I don't want to get test results through there. Again, I know that it's, everybody has their own opinion, but that was, exactly. Like I know families who live by that moment that the test results come through and they, so that was sort of my personal opinion on that. But other than that, I mean, we received really great care. We were between sick kids, CHEO, the general for radiation, and we've received really, really good care.
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of those points are totally fair. And one thing I will say as a bit of a sidebar, the my chart, to be able to look at things without context, and most times that in my humble opinion, is medieval. Like even when we were dealing with our own family, I never signed up when it came to that, just because it's a lot of time it could just be anxiety provoking. But I know everyone's different.
Entirely. Everyone's different. Yeah. That was just maybe you can check the box yes or no. Maybe you want to.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyways, but we received great care. We did. We really did.
And just to get a sense, Tammy, like it sounds like you had a really good connection with your oncologist. But what helps? Like what helps when you're dealing with the healthcare team? Like obviously availability, but in terms of what traits or what sticks out for you anyway, that when you interacted with the healthcare team made a difference?
I mean, they validated every point, that I made or every concern that I had. And I think that really helped, big or small. If I had a question or a concern, it was validated and, there was usually an answer for it, or they tried to find an answer for it. And they were really good at just communication. The communication was second to none, even on times when I remember this one time, we had scan results. I think an MRI was coming out in a PET scan, and she was camping in Prince Edward County, and went to find reception to call me because she knew that we were waiting, it's those things that you like above and beyond. And again, everybody needs vacation, and I can only imagine, how much healthcare professionals look forward to that. But just that little added, I know this family's waiting for this big scan result. I will take 5 minutes to go give it to them, and she was just really good at doing that and then talking us through sort of, everything.
Sorry about that.
So that's great. And everybody was, but there was, we entered the oncology world in 2018. And some of the same nurses that were there when we walked through the doors in 2018 were there, when we walked out in 2024. So, you know,
Mm.
we formed a really good connection with them.
Mm.
And everybody, again, even over at the general, like they don't see kids. And so maybe it's a treat because kids are different. Right. And, they'd go above and beyond to make him his own little sticker chart for radiation days. And, like it, as awful as it is to go through something like that, everyone was really there to kind of carry us the
Mm.
whole way through. Yeah. And so I would say communication is definitely one of the, like, even if I asked a nurse a question and she couldn't figure it out, she was going to go find the answer for me. So I didn't leave, questioning what I had asked. So I think
Mm.
that was, yeah,
No, and
definitely
that's a
saved us.
big one. I mean, that is a big one, Tammy, in terms of validating people's
Hmm.
concerns,
Hmm.
making sure you're available, addressing their needs as best you can, whether you
Hmm.
can't answer it, finding somebody else that can, being
Hmm.
helpful. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
that goes a long way. And I do think, like, I've been in this game for a while. Like, it says a lot about you and your family. It says a lot about Griff that people were going that extra mile,
Hmm. Hmm.
like, to get a hold of oncologists in Prince Edward County. That says a lot. So I
Hmm.
think I think that it really commends the impression that you guys have left with so many of us.
And again, I feel like we were pretty easy people to deal with, like we were on a wild roller coaster. One day we're getting a call that our PET scan is clear, and a week later we're finding out that in fact things are worse. We were just on this roller coaster, and they were very much there, with us. And we were really lucky with the team that we had, and just compassionate. That's what you're dealing with pediatric oncology. I mean, I feel like if you're going into that, you have some compassion to start with. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would hope so. Is
Mhm.
yeah, it's. I mean, those got to be special people for sure.
I asked them, like, even on diagnosis day one, we had someone who was filling in from sick kids, and she was there filling in on mat leave. And I said to her, like, looked her dead in the eyes, and I said, how on earth do you do this for a job when you have an 8-month-old child? And she was like, well, because I get to help other families, and statistically the outcome in childhood cancer is is really good, and I get to see the good, and I get to be a part of that. And I was like, okay, well, you're fit for the job. Whereas, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'll tell you this. I wanted my goal was to go into pediatrics. I did the heme oncology at IWK in Halifax,
Mm-mm.
and I was like, it's probably
Mm-mm.
not my cup, especially after having kids.
No.
Like, it's like,
Mm-mm.
yeah, no, that would
Mm-mm.
be extremely challenging.
Yeah.
So tell me, you've alluded to some of the gifts Griff brought to the world, and I guess one of the things I wanted to come across too is, like, what are some of the how do I say this? I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way, but the lessons this experience has really brought to you. Like you alluded to earlier about, really, you take less for granted, is in so many words. Any, like, what else comes to mind after going through this like really unfortunate ordeal?
I mean, if I'm being 100% honest, I was the type of person that woke up, and if it was raining, I was like, wow, this day's shit, it's raining. Like, I let the weather affect my mood. Um, and I was, a pretty negative person about things that you didn't need to spend any energy being negative about. And then I remember day 2 sitting in that hospital room, looking out the window by myself, away from my family, because at this point, Evan and my daughter are at home, and I'm here for who knows how long, trying to keep, Griffin inside of me. And I kind of decided, if I allow my mind to think negatively about this in the least, it's a slippery slope down, and I'm not going to make it through, And so in that moment, I kind of had a perspective shift, I guess you could say, and realized that there's a lot that's not worth worrying about, and my energy needed to be focused on, the things that actually mattered. Like, how am I going to make sure that I keep this baby in me so that, they can grow, to their potential, and how are we going to make it through this relapse, and make sure that he, still has the best quality of life doing so. And so I think, learning sounds, again, so cliche, to not sweat the small stuff was one of the biggest lessons that I learned, like, I say so what a lot now. Like, so what? Who cares? And I say it with my daughter a lot, in the sense, like, she'll bring up something about school and I'm like, so what? Who cares? Like, that's not worth, it's not worth worrying about. It's not worth spending your time worrying about. And it really, sorry, I'm going to go let the dog out.
No, it's all good.
The dog, this, our dog's big weed. But I also think too, one of the things, I haven't been able to work because, Evan has a really great job, and so my role was to stay home and take care of the kids and make sure Griff got to his appointments, and, our daughter got to school, and the house was, and all of these things. And so, I kind of had to start doing something too that, would allow me to keep my mind occupied and make me feel like I have purpose and move forward. Because again, it, during nap times could have been a slippery slope down. I could have sat there and dwelled on, his treatment and what was coming next and whatnot. And so I found a really good way to divert sort of my brain away from the negative, which I also was able to do during scan time. Scanxiety is a very real thing. When it comes to scan time, you obviously you fixated on, you worry on it, but I was able to sort of change my mindset into, let's not think about it. It's not worth worrying about. I can't change the outcomes. Let's do something else to get through this. And that's really not the type of person that I was, 7 years ago. So, and I say that he taught me that because if it wasn't all of the stuff that I had to go through with him, I very well could still be that person. And I think it taught all of us that, really, to just kind of get up and go and roll with what you have. And, we're lucky to have what we do. And, yeah.
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 Oh, it's amazing, Tammy. What's the best way we could honor Griff?
To just keep talking about him. I don't know. I mean, I even now I'm like, oh my gosh, 3 months out. And I mean, grief's a really strange thing. I mean, I don't even know if I'm dealing with it properly. And I don't even know if I am dealing with it, to be honest with you. I've never had to go through something like this. And I'll say, like, last week was really hard, where I thought about him every day and all day long, and, couldn't even look in his room because it was just awful. I'd, break down. And then the last 2 days, my daughter had dance recital and just all these exciting things going on. And like, he'd pop in and out of my mind, but life felt really normal. Even going to bed last night, I thought, well, that's, that was a really, really good 2 days. We kind of just, of course I thought about him, but, we were rolling forward and we were moving forward. And I just hope people, keep talking about him and honoring him in the sense that I am, where they kind of, he kind of gave them strength. Like if he could do it as this 6-year-old, going through all this, then I can do these hard things too. And I know my father-in-law actually hates the dentist. And my mother-in-law has told me that she said to him before, well, think of everything, that Griff's gone through. And then he, off to the dentist because, you just, I think when you watch somebody go through something that he did, and, I shared a lot of it on social media, most of the good stuff. I didn't share any of the bad stuff because I didn't feel like that was fair to him. I think that you can kind of just think like, well, what would Griff do? And he would just do it. So I hope that continues. I hope that continues. I hope people kind of just think like, this little light that, what I just kept going is what I'm going to do too.
Can I tell you what I'm taking away, Tammy? I'm leaving our conversation feeling I'm going to take less for granted. I am going to not sweat the small stuff like we all should be doing a better job of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be more courageous. I think, we were talking earlier about rodents in pools and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm like, I was, oh my God, but sorry.
I have to go deal with that and I don't want to.
Yeah, but that's that courage piece of, if little Griff was going through all he was able to go through, mm-hmm. There's a lot that we all can step mm-hmm. up for. But lastly, I just want to be all of us like that ray of positivity, that ray of light wherever we go, that mm-hmm. bringing a smile to people's faces. Mm-hmm.
I get messages, often from people, again, through social media. I've created this little community, which has been so wonderful because I've connected with so many amazing oncology families, newly diagnosed, out of it. And it's been really, really wonderful. But I get so many messages of people just sending me pictures like, I thought of Griff today, and it's like a picture of a lightning bolt or whatever. And I saw him here, and this little girl I just got this story from this little girl very quickly because I know you have to go. A little girl who's in his class who he, adored. She had a recital the other day, a piano recital, and her mom sent me, and I'm going to cry, but her mom sent me a message the other day. And, this little girl was very nervous to go up on stage. And in the background, there was an LED lightning bolt sitting up on a shelf. And she turned to her mom and she said, Griff's here. And then her mom said, she just said, Griff could get up and do it, so I'm going to do it. And she got up on stage and she played her little piano recital. But little things like that, these kids that are 6, 7 that, haven't stopped thinking about them. I hope they never do. But I hope that he can continue to, give people that strength that, when they see a lightning bolt or something that's gold, or I don't know, they just, smile knowing that, a little piece of them is maybe there.
Absolutely. I love that mm-hmm. story. And I think we told you this, I can't remember, but I know how much Griff meant to us in the community that next day at school when we were walking to school, and there was just this huge sense of loss, and it's hard for me even to put into words. Like it was like if you didn't know it, you knew it. Like there was something just missing, and mm-hmm. It was a lot of families that hugging each other, supporting each other because of what Griff meant. But there was just that you knew how much he meant just by that feeling, that sentiment. Like no words were even said you know what I mean? Like it was just that feeling. And so I just want to reinforce Tammy, like he was special. He really was special. And
he was. same type of thing. You know, I spoke to a family who I ran into at the CN cycle actually, and she said that her child had an appointment at CHIO. So Griff passed away on the Monday morning, and she had an appointment at CHIO on the Tuesday morning. And she said, you know, I walked in there and you just felt this heaviness about, you know, about the space, which is a heavy space to begin with, because, you know, the kids that are all in there are going through the same thing. And, you know, families who are, you know, watching their children fight for their lives. And she said, and it just felt, you felt this heaviness about it. She said, you know, and I was hugging the nurses, and we were all kind of just, when you're in that community, like the community that we live in, you know, when you're in that oncology community, I think like any loss of any child, whether you know them or not, is a huge loss for the entire community. Just like, you know, what we've built here around the school, it's whether you knew them or not, you know, you feel for the families. And I've unfortunately along the way, you know, we've known children who have passed because of cancer. And, you know, I at the time grieved harder than I did when, you know, he was first diagnosed, because you just feel that loss that the family feels. And again, I think it just, again, you take away from it that, you know, you are so lucky to be walking home with your children, or, you know, having your, and I think that it kind of just, unfortunately, gives everybody that little bit of perspective shift that, you know, this morning was really fucking hard, but you know, my kids are coming home from school today, and I think that, you know, it kind of, it's unfortunate, but you know, hopefully when people are going through a hard time, they can just, you know, think of him and us, and, you know, well, like, this is really shitty right now, but it could be worse, you know? So.
Thank you for that, Tammy. You and your family have done an incredible job when it comes to awareness, fundraising. I'm just, maybe we could point us towards ways of supporting you guys too, and any initiatives that you feel like are that we could help out with. So,
I mean, very quickly, donate blood. Like we were, you know, it doesn't cost anything and everybody has it. And we were really lucky the first time around where we didn't need any transfusions. And it was crazy that we got through without transfusions. And then nearing the end, you know, we were getting platelets and blood every other day. And Griff was a negative, which is a fairly rare blood type. And it's needed. So, I mean, something that doesn't cost money, because not everyone has money to give. And, you know, you know, it's really is the gift of life. You need it. And so donating blood is huge, huge. And then I'm a part of PFAC at CHIO, so the Patient Family Advisory Committee, and I actually just joined a research study that they're looking for grants for to try and advance treatment for cancers. And so, you know, we fundraise for the CHIO Foundation, and it's so cool to be on that committee because I get to see sort of where the money is going. You know, and so I think that that's huge, obviously. And the CHIO Foundation does so much more. There's so much, you know, support for families. You know, in Pogo, there's, I mean, people have to quit their jobs when they're going through this. And, you know, so there's financial support through there. And I don't know, so stupid, but just be kind. You know, I just be kind to people, because you never know what they're going through. You know, I'll never forget that first time I went out when I think it was a week after Griffin passed, and I was getting things for Easter for Abby. And, you know, the lady in line behind me was grumbling about someone who cut in line in front of me and about how I should say something. And I wanted to just turn around and say, you know, get over it. Like, it could be so much worse, but you never know what anyone's going through, you know? So if in the very least, if you can do anything, just be kind, because you never know. You could be standing behind me in a grocery store who's trying to hold it all together. And, you know, so in the very least, just be kind.
Right.
Yeah.
love that, Tammy. And we could all just get a little bit of sprinkle of that. Tammy, listen, this has been so rewarding for me to hear your story, to hear what you guys have had to overcome and the impact you're leaving on the world through your advocacy, through your fundraising, and now being part of these committees and such. And your message has been absolutely beautiful. And
Thank you.
I'm very grateful for you joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay. I'm going to go deal with my waterlogged